Rome was not built in a day, but what it built in centuries reshaped the world. For a span that stretches across 2 millennia, Roman law, language, architecture, and politics set the rules by which nations would later govern themselves. Republic, Senate, veto, consul, these are not abstract relics. They are living concepts borrowed from Rome's experiments in power. At its height, 1 in every 5 people on Earth lived under Roman dominion. Empires before and after could only glimpse that scale. How did a city born on the muddy banks of the Tiber become the engine of the ancient world? How did a republic of farmers and merchants transform into an empire that stitched together Europe, North Africa, and the Near East? And how, after centuries of dominance, did it unravel? Legend frames Rome's origin like myth. Twin brothers cast into a river, suckled by a she-wolf, raised to found a city. Romulus and Remus are beautiful stories of destiny and blood, but archaeology draws a more measured portrait. Around 625 BCE, along the Tiber's bend, small settlements and trading posts coalesced into something more permanent. In a landscape known to its people as Latium, modest villages gravitated toward a strategic crossing, and trade brought permanence. In those first centuries, Rome was not born as a kingdom by divine right. Power was negotiated, contested, and shared. Kings were chosen with the advice of a council that would evolve into the Senate and a pattern of mixed governance. Aristocratic families alongside common citizens began to form. From 600 to 510 BCE, Rome's so-called Age of Kings unfolded, but the last monarch provoked a revolution. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, proud and ruthless, ruled until outrage over a brutal crime ignited a popular uprising. In 509 BCE, the monarchy fell, and the republic was born. Power was redistributed, written into institutions: the Senate, the division between patricians and plebeians, and the annually elected consuls who carried executive authority. It was an experiment in balanced governance, imperfect and always contested, but it worked. For centuries, Rome expanded across the Italian peninsula, absorbing neighbors and demanding allegiance. Until by 338 BCE, the Italian question was largely settled. War, however, would be Rome's true teacher. The Punic Wars against Carthage, fought across the Mediterranean from 264 to 146 BCE, were not mere skirmishes. They were epoch-making confrontations that decided the fate of trade, grain, and naval supremacy. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps and his victories at Cannae remain the stuff of military legend, but Rome endured. After 3 brutal wars, Carthage was razed, its population slaughtered or enslaved, and Rome emerged as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. Conquest brought wealth, but it also imported Greek culture, philosophy, and art into the Roman bloodstream. The Hellenic world gave Rome its language of thought. Greek architects, sculptors, and ideas of governance helped shape Rome's transformation from regional power to imperial heart. By the 1st century BCE, Roman expansion had produced wealth beyond precedent, and with it, new stresses. Land concentration, social inequality, and veteran soldiers returning home to find their farms gone created a volatile mix. Political violence bled into public life. Ambitious commanders exploited popular grievances and private armies to seize power. In this fevered climate rose Julius Caesar, a general whose conquest of Gaul made him a household name and a political threat. His crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BCE was not merely an act of defiance. It was a declaration that the Republic's rules could be broken by men with the will and legions to do so. Caesar's ascent exposed the Republic's limits. His assassination on the Ides of March, a brutal act by senators who feared tyranny, did not restore republican order. Instead, it plunged Rome into fresh civil wars, setting the stage for a different kind of ruler. From the chaos emerged Octavian, later Augustus, who in time consolidated power, rebranded authority under imperial titles, and inaugurated a new regime. The Republic's funeral, in a sense, gave birth to an empire that promised stability. Pax Romana arrived not by the absence of war, but by the imposition of order. Roads, legal structures, and monumental building projects that bound provinces to Rome's core. Augustus Auis' reign marked the start of an era in which centralized power delivered infrastructure and prosperity on an unprecedented scale. He built aqueducts and temples, reorganized the military, and created administrative systems that outlived him by centuries. For many Romans, empire meant peace and provision. For others, it meant subjugation. As rulers multiplied, so did the contradictions of power. Talented emperors and madmen, builders and killers, philosophers and predators. The imperial stage would host both Trajan's maximal expansion and Nero's notorious excesses. It would cradle philosophical rulers like Marcus Aurelius and descend into the chaos of multiple claimants, praetorian coups, and rapid turnover. That contrast, capacity to organize across continents and susceptibility to internal rot, is Rome's central paradox. From reformers who tried to rescue the Republic to emperors who consolidated rule, Roman history reads like a continuous negotiation between order and ambition, law and force. In the next act, we will trace how military genius, political innovation, and cultural synthesis built a global superpower, and how the very strength that made Rome dominant also carried the seeds of its decline. Rome's ascent from regional city to imperial engine was driven by an uncommon fusion of military innovation, political experimentation, and cultural absorption. The Roman legions were not merely armies, they were instruments of statecraft, disciplined, adaptable, and organized around a meritocratic professionalism that other powers lacked. Roman engineers taught soldiers to build roads, bridges, and fortifications as they advanced. The same legions that fought at the frontier laid the infrastructure that bound provinces to the capital. Roads became arteries of power, enabling rapid troop movement, tax collection, and the transmission of law. Logistics, more than glory, won Rome its wars. Republican institutions amplified this power. The Senate, magistrates, and assemblies created a system in which ambition had constitutional outlets, tribunates for the people, consulships for military command, and legal precedents that restrained arbitrary rule, at least in theory. But politics was always a theater of rivalry. The competition for honor and wealth pushed elite Romans to seek advantage through patronage, citizenship, and conquest. Military success translated into political capital, and generals returned to Rome with loyal veteran armies that could decide elections by force. That dynamic transformed Roman politics into an arena where personal loyalties often outpaced institutional loyalty. The career of Julius Caesar crystallizes the era's contradictions. Conquest in Gaul made Caesar famous and rich. It made him powerful enough to challenge the Senate itself. His civil war exposed the fragile balance between public institutions and private armies. Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE only intensified the struggle, because it showed that eliminating a man did not eliminate the forces that made him powerful. In the vacuum that followed, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, maneuvered with a political dexterity that outlasted open conflict. By defeating Antony and Cleopatra at Actium and by consolidating command, Octavian created a new political formula: preserve republican forms while placing real authority in the hands of a single ruler. Thus Augustus fashioned an imperial framework that delivered stability without abandoning the language of tradition. Empire brought prosperity but also new stresses. Rome's expansion incorporated diverse peoples, languages, and religions. Governing the Mediterranean required new administrative techniques, provincial governors, tax systems, legal codification, and Rome adapted by absorbing local elites into its ruling class. Citizenship became a tool of integration. Laws and Roman courts spread cultural influence even when arms had done the conquering. At the same time, conquest generated enormous wealth for a narrow elite. Latifundia, vast estates worked by slaves, displaced smallholders, swelling urban populations and creating social pressures that populists and demagogues could exploit. Political violence erupted as elites and reformers collided. The late Republic saw a procession of crises: land reforms proposed by the Gracchi brothers, the rise of populist leaders, and the increasing use of force to settle political scores. Assassinations, proscriptions, and civil war became instruments of policy. The Republic's constitutional architecture proved unable to contain leaders who combined mass support with military command. Power accrued to individuals who could command loyalty through spectacle, land or army, rather than through law. Under the emperors, Rome reached stunning administrative sophistication, yet the imperial system carried its own contradictions. Succession was rarely institutionalized. It relied on adoption, favor, and force. The emperor's nature, benevolent reformer or tyrant, depended on personality as much as on structures. When capable rulers like Trajan, Hadrian, or Marcus Aurelius governed, the empire prospered. Borders were secured, civic life flourished, public works multiplied, and the legal corpus developed. When corrupt or incompetent men seized power, misrule followed, fiscal strain, purges, and the erosion of trust between ruler and ruled. Military pressure intensified in the 3rd century. External threats from Germanic tribes, Persian expansions, and internal usurpers fractured imperial cohesion. The crisis of the 3rd century turned Rome into a battlefield of short-lived emperors, each claiming legitimacy through arms. In response, emperors like Diocletian restructured power, dividing authority between East and West, instituting administrative reforms, and stabilizing the currency. These measures preserved the empire, but also transformed it into a more bureaucratic organism. The old republican ethos, citizen soldiers and civic competition, gave way to a hierarchical state dependent on complex administration and imperial patronage. Religion and culture also reshaped Rome. The absorption of Hellenic thought produced a Roman elite steeped in Greek philosophy and rhetoric, while popular cults and mystery religions spread across the provinces. The eventual adoption of Christianity as a state religion under Constantine and later emperors reoriented the empire's spiritual center and altered its social fabric. Christianity provided a unifying moral language across diverse peoples, but it also undermined the old pagan identities and introduced new schisms. With Constantine's conversion and the establishment of Constantinople, power began to shift eastward. Where economic vitality and defensible geography offered resilience, the West would not always share. Ultimately, Rome's decline was not a single cataclysm, but a long retreat shaped by cumulative pressures, economic fatigue, military overextension, political fragmentation, and cultural transformation. The Western Empire's fall in 476 CE marked an end of imperial rule in the West, but it was the product of centuries of erosion rather than a single decisive blow. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman world, Byzantium, survived, adapted, and preserved Roman law and culture for centuries more. Rome's story in this middle act is therefore one of extraordinary creativity and fatal contradictions. Its systems, administrative, legal, architectural, military, were unmatched in the ancient world and formed the blueprint of modern governance. Yet those very systems, when stretched beyond sustainable limits or entrusted to unworthy hands, became instruments of decline. In the next act, we will confront collapse and legacy, how a world empire dissolved, how its institutions endured, and why Rome's ideas continue to shape our world long after its legions have vanished. Rome's final centuries unfold like the slow dimming of a brilliant flame, its light still powerful, still commanding, yet flickering against forces it could no longer fully command. The empire that once stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates now struggled to maintain the very borders it had drawn in triumph. Economic strain deepened as the cost of defending vast territories outpaced the wealth they produced. Agriculture faltered under repeated invasions. Inflation hollowed out the currency, and a once thriving trade network fractured under constant pressure. The Roman world, built on order and control, found itself increasingly vulnerable to disorder from within and assaults from without. The Western Empire's political structure became a revolving door of short-lived emperors, many raised by military factions, many deposed just as quickly. Loyalty became transactional. Armies proclaimed emperors based on promises rather than merit. Strategic decisions blurred under the weight of personal ambition, and regions once governed with precision drifted toward autonomy. Local commanders, rather than imperial prefects, began acting as de facto rulers. Rome's identity, long defined by unity under law, now loosened under the tension of fragmentation. Meanwhile, the Eastern Empire, anchored in Constantinople, grew wealthier, better fortified and more capable of confronting external threats. Its walls, treasury, and strategic geography gave it resilience the West lacked. As a result, the two halves that Diocletian had divided for administrative efficiency grew further and further apart in culture, economy, and political capacity. When invaders tested the boundaries, the East endured. The West collapsed under the weight of its exposed frontiers and depleted resources. Germanic tribes, pressured themselves by migrations and climatic changes, pushed relentlessly into Roman lands. The Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 CE, not as conquerors seeking destruction, but as displaced people demanding security and recognition Rome could no longer offer. Vandals crossed into North Africa, taking control of the grain supply that once fed the Western Empire. The Huns, under Attila, ravaged the Balkans and threatened Italy itself. Rome, once master of war, now negotiated survival through diplomacy, bribes, and fragile alliances. Its greatest strength had always been assimilation, turning enemies into allies, foreigners into citizens, but the system could no longer absorb the scale of pressure it faced. By the mid-5th century, the Western Empire resembled a shadow of its former self. Power had migrated to generals who commanded armies of mixed loyalty. Provincial elites sought protection not from Rome, but from local strongmen. The empire's final collapse came not in a single catastrophic blow, but in a moment symbolic of exhaustion. In 476 CE, the young emperor Romulus Augustulus, ironically bearing the name of Rome's legendary founder, was deposed by the Germanic commander Odoacer. No grand battle, no dramatic siege, just a quiet dismissal of authority that had long since lost its force. Rome's imperial rule in the West ended not with fire and fury, but with resignation. Yet Rome did not disappear. Its ideas, institutions, and cultural foundations endured in forms more influential than its armies ever were. Roman law became the backbone of European legal systems. Roman architecture inspired centuries of builders who copied its arches, domes, and monumental scale. Latin shaped the languages of millions and became the vessel of scholarship, religion, and government. Christianity, rising through the empire's final centuries, carried Roman organization into a new spiritual empire that outlasted every dynasty. And the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine Empire, preserved Roman knowledge for nearly 1,000 years, shaping the medieval and early modern worlds. Rome's story ended as all empires must, not with the loss of territory alone, but with the erosion of the systems that once transformed ambition into order. It teaches us that power is never permanent, that institutions must adapt or decay, and that even the mightiest structures can falter when leadership fails or circumstances shift beyond control. But Rome also leaves a different message, one carved not in marble or bronze, but in the DNA of modern civilization. Our republics, our laws, our languages, our architecture, even our understanding of citizenship and governance reflect Rome's enduring imprint. The empire may have fallen, but the Roman idea did not. Its legacy survived conquest, chaos, and time itself. As we step back from this vast historical arc, from mythic origins to republican rise, imperial glory, and the long descent, we see a deeper truth. Rome was never just a city, never just an empire. It was a blueprint for how humans aspire, organize, fight, build, fail, and rebuild again. The stones of the Forum may be broken, the legions long dissolved, but the Roman mind still shapes the world we live in. And that is why Rome's story endures, not as a ruin, but as a mirror. A reminder that power must be earned, that stability must be protected, and that no civilization, no matter how dominant, is beyond the reach of time.